Colorado Territory, July 1873. The wagon wheel hit a rut so deep it snapped the axle clean in two, and the jolt sent Susanna Fletcher lurching backwards, her hands scrabbling for the side rail as her boots lost grip. The air rushed past her. Her bonnet flew off, and the rocky ground rushed up until two strong arms caught her mid-fall. "I've got you now," the cowboy said, his voice low and steady as he held her close against his chest. For a moment, she could not speak. Dust swirled around them, the sun blazing down from the clear sky. Her heart thudded wildly, not from the fall but from him. His hat shadowed his face, but his eyes met hers. Steady, sure, the color of dark river rock. His grip around her waist was firm but careful, and he smelled of leather and sun. She found her voice. You did not." He helped her stand, his hand lingering just a second longer than it needed to. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said, brushing at her skirt though her hands trembled. "Thank you." The cowboy gave a short nod, then turned to inspect the broken wagon. He looked like he belonged out here. Tan coat, dusty at the shoulders, boots, cracked from miles of use, revolver at his hip. A man shaped by the land. Susanna swallowed hard and tried to calm her breathing. She had only known him a day. He had joined their small wagon train outside of Trinidad, saying he was headed west toward the San Juan Mountains. Her father, desperate for any help with the horses, had welcomed him without question. Now her father was dead. Fever took him 3 days ago, and they buried him off the trail with only a pine cross and a prayer. That left just her, 18, and her younger brother Oliver, barely 8, too small to do much more than tend the fire. She turned and found Oliver crouched near the edge of the sagebrush, his wide eyes locked on her. "I am fine," she called to him. "Just a scare." The cowboy crouched beside the wrecked wheel. Axles split clean through. "You will not make it far. Like this." "We have to," Susanna said, stepping closer. "There is nothing for us back east. Our land went to the bank. Mama passed 2 winters ago. We have no one else." He looked up at her, his steady gaze not flinching. "Then I will help you get where you are going." She blinked. "Why?" He stood slowly, brushing his hands on his trousers. "Because you need it and because I said I would." She stared at him. "We do not even know your name." He tipped his hat. "Malcolm Hawthorne." Susanna hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Susanna Fletcher. And that is my brother Oliver." Malcolm gave the boy a respectful nod. "Pleased to meet you, Oliver." Oliver stepped forward, clutching the sides of his trousers. "Are you a cowboy?" Malcolm crouched to his level. "I suppose I am." "You shoot bandits sometimes," Malcolm said with a little grin. "But mostly I keep people safe." Oliver's eyes lit up. "Will you stay with us long as you need me to?" Susanna watched the exchange, her throat tightening. She had never asked for help before, not like this. Her life had been a string of hard years and harder choices, but this man, he had caught her, literally. They set up camp just off the trail near a creek that ran shallow but clean. Malcolm unhitched the horses and helped Oliver gather wood, while Susanna boiled beans and what little salted pork they had left. That night she sat across the fire from Malcolm, watching the flames dance in his eyes. "You said you are headed west," she said. "What is waiting for you there?" He stirred the coals with a stick. "Nothing really, just land. Quiet. I put in for a claim near our thought I would try ranching." "Alone?" she asked. He nodded. "It is easier that way." She looked down at her hands. "Sometimes." He glanced at her, his voice softer now. "Not always." Oliver was already asleep, curled up in a blanket beside the wagon. The stars came out bright and endless above the plains. Susanna pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You could leave," she said. "You do not owe us anything." "I do not leave people behind," he said simply. The next morning, Malcolm got up early and began repairing the wagon. Susanna helped where she could, learning how to brace the new axle with salvaged wood and rope. By noon, it was moving again, slow, but it would hold. They traveled west, the mountains rising in the distance like a promise. That evening, Oliver climbed up to sit beside Malcolm on the front bench. "Are you going to stay with us forever?" the boy asked. Susanna's breath caught as she walked beside them. Malcolm gave a thoughtful pause. "If your sister lets me." Susanna looked up at him, her heart pounding, and for the first time since her father's grave, she smiled. Not out of politeness, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. They made camp near a stand of cottonwoods. Susanna helped Oliver wash up, then tucked him in with a kiss to his brow. She turned and found Malcolm standing a few feet away watching her. "You are good with him," he said. "He is all I have left." He nodded. "You are all he has too." She stepped closer. "Why are you really helping us?" He looked at her, then really looked. "Because when I saw you fall, something in me knew I could not let you go." She felt her breath catch in her throat. "I meant it," he said. "I have got you now." She moved without thinking, her hand brushing his. His fingers closed over hers. They stood like that for a long moment under the stars, the silence between them warm and full. And though neither said it aloud, something had shifted. Because love starts in moments like these, unexpected, sure, and stronger than the worst the world can throw. And Susanna Fletcher, for the first time in her life, felt safe. The trail narrowed as they climbed into the foothills. The air thinner, the heat retreating beneath a slow breath of pine. Malcolm rode ahead, leading the stronger of the two horses by the bridle, while Susanna guided the second. Oliver perched between her and the worn leather seat. The wagon creaked beneath the strain, but it held. By dusk, the land had turned steep and red-veined with scrub oak clinging to the slopes and the scent of juniper thick in the wind. They made camp beside a split boulder and a trickling spring. Malcolm tied the horses to a low limb, then walked the perimeter, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He didn't speak unless necessary, but Susanna had begun to understand that silence wasn't distance with him. It was attention. She knelt by the fire pit, coaxing flame from tinder and dry pine needles. Oliver sat beside her, sharpening a small stick with his pocket knife. Malcolm returned just as the first stars blinked into view, his boots scuffing softly through the dust. Prints on the west side. Elk, maybe, could be mule deer. She glanced up. Dangerous. He shook his head. No sign of cats or anything on two legs. She nodded and rose, brushing her palms against her skirt. "I could use your eyes on something." He followed her to the wagon where she pulled aside a canvas flap and revealed a wooden box wedged beneath the bench. The lid was carved with ivy, leaves worn soft at the edges. "I found it in Father's things," she said. "Don't recognize it." Malcolm crouched and ran his fingers along the edge before lifting the latch. Inside lay a stack of folded papers, a brass locket, and a cloth-wrapped parcel. He handed the locket to her without a word. She turned it over. Inside, behind glass, rested a painted miniature of a young woman with dark hair pinned high in a solemn mouth. "That's not my mother." Malcolm didn't ask. He picked up the cloth bundle and unwrapped it slowly. Inside lay a revolver, small and delicate, the handle inlaid with mother of pearl. Susanna drew a breath. He never carried one. Said he didn't believe in killing. "Looks like it belonged to someone else," Malcolm said, turning it in his hand. "Fancy Eastern make. You sure he didn't have any dealings before you came west?" She shook her head. "He was a schoolmaster in Kansas, taught at the mission near Lawrence. After the war, he lost the post. Said he wanted to start fresh." Malcolm looked at her then, not with suspicion, but the kind of measuring thoughtfulness that made her feel unsteady. "You think he was hiding something?" "I think we all do sometimes." She folded the cloth back over the pistol and shut the box. "It doesn't matter now." Malcolm didn't argue. He stood, stepped back, and let the quiet settle. The fire cracked behind them. Oliver was already asleep, curled against the saddle blanket. Susanna sat down near the flames, arms wrapped around her knees. Malcolm joined her, folding his legs beneath him, keeping a respectful distance. "Did you have family?" she asked. A younger brother. He didn't make it through the winter of '68. Her voice softened. I'm sorry. He was the clever one, always, drawing plans for machines. Said he'd build a bridge clear over the Rockies one day. I told him he was dreaming. She tilted her head, and now Malcolm looked toward the dark ridge. Now I believe he might have done it if he'd had more time. Susanna didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't try. She let the silence stretch, not heavy but full. The flames flickered in her peripheral vision, casting light against Malcolm's features, angles worn by wind and sun, eyes that saw more than he let on. After a while, he spoke again, quieter than before. I don't plan on riding off when we reach the end of the trail. She turned to him. What do you mean? I mean, if you'll have the help, I'd like to stay, help raise what's needed, build what isn't. Her throat tightened. You hardly know us. I know. Enough. He looked at her, and this time there was no shadow between the words. You don't lean on people easy, and I don't offer for the sake of it. Something in her chest cracked open, gentle and slow. She reached over and placed the edge of her hand against his. I'd like that, she said. He didn't move, didn't grip her hand, but the warmth of him beside her, the steady breath, the quiet promise. It was enough. And though the wind picked up and the fire hissed, the night held a kind of stillness that felt like the beginning of something that would not be undone. The trail bent westward into a high valley, where the air carried the scent of crushed sage, and the morning dew lingered longer on the grass. They reached a narrow bend in the river where the banks were soft and wide enough for a handful of wagons to settle. Malcolm reined in the lead horse and turned in the saddle. We'll stop here, he said. Ground's good, trees for cover, water nearby. Susanna nodded, lifting Oliver from the wagon seat before climbing down herself. Her arms ached from the long stretch of uneven road, but there was steadiness in her step now, a rhythm she hadn't known she'd missed until it returned. They set to work. Malcolm unstrapped the wagon canvas while Susanna hauled water from the stream. Oliver gathered flat stones, lining them in a circle for the fire. It was the sort of labor that passed without complaint, each task a small promise to the next. Malcolm knelt by the stream, rinsing his hands. When Susanna passed with the bucket, he looked up, squinting against the sun. There's elk sign farther up the ridge. Might try for meat in the morning. She crouched beside him, dipping the bucket again. You hunt often. I know how to take what's needed. No more. Did someone teach you? He nodded. An older ranch hand out of towns. He didn't speak much English. Taught me with gestures and patience. She smiled faintly. That sounds familiar. He looked at her, something flickering behind his expression, something close to warmth but quieter. She didn't press it. Later, while Oliver napped in the shade of the wagon, she found Malcolm seated on a fallen log, shaping a length of pine with his knife. She approached slowly, brushing her palms against her apron. What are you making? He didn't look up. A bow, nothing fancy, enough to keep Oliver's hands useful. He'll like that, she said, sitting beside him, careful to keep her skirt from catching on the bark. I've never seen him take to someone so quick. He's a good boy. Pays attention. She watched the small curls of wood fall at their feet. Children don't always get noticed for that. Malcolm paused in his carving. You saying you weren't? She hesitated. I read early. Wrote poetry once. My mother encouraged it. My father not so much. He glanced at her brows drawn slightly. Why not? He thought it was soft. Said the world didn't have time for dreams. Malcolm didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. World's got time for what you make room for. She looked down at her hands, thumbs pressed together. I haven't written anything in years. Maybe it's time you started again. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows through the trees. They ate quietly jerked beef, flatbread, and the last of the dried apples. Afterward, Malcolm walked the perimeter with his rifle while Susanna cleaned the tin plates by the stream. She saw him pause near the edge of the trees, his silhouette still and watchful. That night, Oliver curled against the wagon wheel wrapped in a bedroll. Susanna sat on a wool blanket, her boots off, her shawl drawn close against the evening chill. When Malcolm returned, he didn't sit right away. He stood near the fire, rubbing his hands together absently. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked, her voice low. He looked toward the flames. "I've tried not to. For a long time, it was just one day to the next." She nodded. "I know that feeling." He crouched beside her, resting his elbows on his knees. "This place, when we reached the claim, I'd build small to start a main room lofted above enough pasture. For the horses, maybe a milk cow if we can trade for one." She turned to him, the firelight catching the curve of her cheek. "You sound like you've pictured it." "I have." "For yourself?" He didn't answer at first, then, "Not anymore." Her breath caught and he reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the touch so gentle it barely stirred her skin. "I meant what I said," he murmured. "I didn't catch you just to set you back down." She didn't move away. "I didn't think you did." He leaned in, his forehead touching hers, the moment suspended like a held breath. When he kissed her, it was quiet and steady. No urgency, just the shitty of something righting itself after being wrong for too long. When they parted, she rested her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her back, pulling her close. The fire crackled beside them, and the land around them held still. Trust, once a distant thing, lay between them now like something living, not spoken, not promised, only present. And in the hush of that mountain night, with Oliver safe and the stars above, Susanna Fletcher knew she'd been caught not just from falling, but from the long ache of being alone. The valley narrowed into a basin rimmed with aspen and fir, and the trail gave way to a clearing where the earth flattened into a patch of meadow. Malcolm halted the wagon just before the tree line and dismounted. He stood for a moment, studying the slope beyond, then turned to Susanna and Oliver. "This is it." Oliver scrambled down wide-eyed. "It's real big." Malcolm nodded. "Good land. Soil's dark. There's a spring near the back rise. Should hold through winter." Susanna stepped down more, slowly, her boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. "You're sure this is the place from your claim?" He walked a few paces forward, dropped to one knee, and ran his fingers through the dirt. "Marked it with the land office myself. Surveyor came through last spring. Nobody settled near." The afternoon sun cut through the trees in long golden slants, and the air smelled of moss and warm pine. A pair of grass startled from the brush, fluttering off toward the ridge. Malcolm stood and rubbed his palms together. "We'll need to start clearing. Get a base down before the frosts come." Susanna nodded. "We'll need a place for Oliver to sleep. That's dry. I can help raise walls." Malcolm gave her a long look, one corner of his mouth twitching. "You don't hesitate." She met his eyes. "I've been made to wait long enough." He didn't answer, but he reached for the axe strapped to the wagon side. They worked until dusk cooled the trees. Malcolm felled 2 smaller pines and stripped the limbs while Susanna sorted the straighter branches into piles. Oliver wandered the edge of the clearing, gathering stones and calling out when he found anything round or shining. By the time the sky turned violet, Malcolm had notched 2 logs for corner posts. Susanna rinsed her arms in the stream, then set about cooking beans and boiled greens they'd foraged along the low banks. She didn't speak much, and neither did he, but when he passed close to hand her a tin cup of water, their fingers brushed. His hand lingered for a moment, warm, intentional. That night they spread the blankets beneath the wagon, close enough to the fire to catch the warmth, far enough to see the stars open overhead. "Did you think about this place much before you saw it?" she asked, lying on her side, watching the night sky through the branches. "I thought about quiet," he said, "and not having to look over my shoulder." She folded her hands beneath her cheek. "And now?" He didn't answer right away. Then now I think about building something that lasts." She shifted closer, their shoulders nearly touching. "What made you stop wandering?" "I didn't," he said. "Not really. Just found the place worth staying for." Her throat tightened at that. A sudden sharpness that wasn't pain exactly. She reached across the space between them, found his hand beside hers, and laced her fingers through his. He didn't pull away. Morning came pale and cold, and Malcolm rose early. He walked the perimeter of the clearing again, this time marking trees for felling. Susanna packed their supplies into the wagon's corner to free more space for Oliver, then helped brace the first upright post with rope and rock. By midday, the first timbers stood in a square while Malcolm worked the frame. Susanna took Oliver toward the spring. They climbed a short hill, following the stream to its source beneath a stand of birch. The water bubbled clear from the rocks. Oliver crouched beside it. "Can we build a pond?" Susanna laughed softly. "What for? Fish or frogs? Maybe both." She crouched beside him. "If we stay here long enough, I imagine we'll find all sorts of things." The boy looked up. "Are we staying?" She studied his face. "Do you want to?" He nodded. "Malcolm says we can plant things. I want to grow strawberries." She smoothed his hair. "Then we'll grow them." On their way back down, she spotted a patch of wild raspberries along the slope. She picked a few and slipped them into her apron pocket. By the time they returned, Malcolm had raised one wall to waist height and was sweeping sawdust with a branch. "Found something," she said, crossing to him. He looked up. She held out a small handful of the berries. He took one and ate it, slowly, wiping his hand on his trousers. "You always find the good things. You just have to look where most folks don't." He looked at her then, eyes shaded beneath the brim of his hat. "I reckon I did." That night they didn't speak much. After Oliver fell asleep, Malcolm sat beside the fire, sharpening his blade, while Susanna mended a tear in her hem. The quiet was no longer unfamiliar. It was the kind of silence shared between people who no longer had anything to prove. When the fire burned low, she set her sewing aside and looked over at him. "You ever miss anything from before?" He didn't look up. "Sometimes like what?" He rested the wet stone against his knee. "Not much. Maybe the sound of a fiddle. I used to hear one on Sundays when I was a boy." She smiled. "My mother played dulcimer, the soft kind with the hammers. Still have it." "No, burned with the house." He nodded once. "We'll find another or build one." She laughed softly. "You think you can build anything?" He looked over serious. "If it matters, I'll find a way." She didn't answer, but she reached across and took his hand again, this time with no hesitation, and he held on steady and sure. By late September, the first frost turned the meadow grasses silver in the mornings, and the wall timbers darkened with dew. The cabin stood half-finished but strong, 4 low walls and rafters notched by hand. Malcolm had begun laying the roof with pine shakes split from the trees they'd felled. Susanna had sewn curtains from flour, sackcloth and pressed dried petals between their folds, storing them away for a time when the windows were glassed. Oliver collected river stones to line the hearth, his hands always busy now. He'd grown quieter, not withdrawn, but settled. His questions came less often, and when they did, they were thoughtful. "Does a home need a bell?" he asked. One afternoon, squatting near the corner post with a piece of twine in hand, Susanna looked up from where she was scrubbing the last of the summer dust from their clothes. "For what?" "To call people in for supper," she smiled. "You can call with your voice," he frowned, "but a bell's louder." Malcolm, overhead on the roof, leaned back on his heels. "We'll hang one once we've earned it." Susanna met his eyes. "And how do you earn a bell?" He pressed a shake into place and tapped it with a mallet by staying long enough to knead it. That night they cooked onions and beans over the fire, the scent carrying on the wind. They ate inside the cabin shell, the roof half covered, the stars still visible through the rafters. The fire in the hearth crackled low, and Oliver drifted to sleep. wrapped in a wool blanket, his head resting on his folded coat. Susanna sat with her back to the wall, her legs drawn up, the warmth of the stone hearth against her side. Malcolm sat across from her, his hands rough from the day's work. A shallow scrape darkened across one knuckle. "You should let me clean that," she said, nodding to it. "It'll close on its own." She reached across anyway, drawing his hand toward her lap. "It doesn't need to fester." He didn't stop her. Her fingers were gentle but certain, dabbing the cut with a cloth dipped in liquor. He watched her without speaking, his gaze steady. "You always do that," she said, not looking up. "What's that?" "Hold still. Like you're waiting to see something." "I am." She glanced at him then. "What if you'll stay?" Her hands paused. "I told you I would. You said we'd build this place. You didn't say you'd stay in it." She set the cloth aside. "Do you think I'd walk away now? I just need to hear it." She folded his hand between hers. "I'm not going anywhere, Malcolm." He exhaled, softly. "Then neither am I." The wind picked up outside, brushing against the boards. The fire dimmed, casting long shadows. They sat close now, knees touching. "Before this," she murmured, "I didn't think I'd have more than a roof and a duty. I didn't know peace could feel like this. It's not peace without someone to share it with." She leaned in, her voice low. "Then let's make it ours." He kissed her with the kind of patience she'd come to know in him, slow, sure, and without pretense. His hand rested at the curve of her neck, her fingers curled against his collar. There was no rush, only the quiet certainty of two people who had taken the long way to find each other when the fire burned down to coals. They curled beside Oliver, the three of them beneath the unfinished roof, the stars above fading into dawn. Over the next weeks, they finished the cabin. Malcolm built a table from saw planks, and Susanna embroidered a cloth for its center. They dug a root cellar and split firewood high as the window ledge. Oliver fashioned a bell from an old horseshoe and nailed it above the door with help from Malcolm, who let him swing the hammer for each strike. When the first snow fell in early November, it came soft and steady, covering the meadow in white. Inside the cabin, the fire glowed bright, and the walls held firm. They ate bread baked in a cast-iron pot and drank tea steeped with dried mint from the stream bank. One evening, as the wind howled just beyond the door, Malcolm took a small box from the shelf, a simple thing he'd carved himself. He handed it to Susanna without a word. Inside lay a gold band, plain but smooth, warmed by his palm. She looked up, her eyes wide. "You made this." "I traded for the gold and silver in last week." "It was a brooch. Didn't seem right to give you. Something someone else wore." Her voice caught. "You could have waited." "I did," he said. "Years longer than I should have." She didn't ask anything more. She simply took his hand and placed the ring on her finger. They married the next morning alone, but for Oliver, who stood proudly beside them in the snow. Malcolm recited the words he had written out on a scrap of paper, and Susanna answered with her own, her voice steady and full. That night they lay beneath the finished roof, the fire crackling, the wind stilled outside. Malcolm brushed her hair from her face and kissed her temple. "You're home now," he said, and she was. Years passed. The trees grew tall around the cabin, and the meadow filled each spring with wildflowers and bees. They planted strawberries along the southern edge, just as Oliver wanted. He grew into a strong young man, taking to horses and carpentry both, and when he built his own cabin a quarter-mile down the slope, he rang the horseshoe bell to tell them it was done. Susanna taught reading to the children of nearby settlers, and Malcolm kept the land strong, his hands always busy, his heart steady as ever. They never had much, but they always had enough, and each night, no matter how long the day or how deep the snow, they found each other again by the hearth, her head against his shoulder, his hand wrapped around hers. They grew older, but never apart. And in that quiet valley high in the Colorado hills, they lived a long, full life together, loved and never alone again.